Hello, this is Randy with Excel for Freelancers, and welcome to the dynamic RACI Matrix. In this week's exclusive training, I'm going to show you how to build this incredible RACI Matrix right inside Excel, complete with the ability to add and update projects, filter projects, of course add any number of tasks along with any number of category and due dates along with status, and add employees to your RACI Matrix. We're going to go step by step over every line of code, formula, and format. I cannot wait, so let's get started. All right, thanks so much for joining us today. I really appreciate all the time you put into your Excel skills. I try to bring you something each and every week, something special. If you do like these trainings, please don't forget to click the subscribe button and also the notification icon bell. That'll ensure that you get these trainings each and every week delivered right to you for absolutely free. So what is a RACI Matrix, or RACI? We'll call it RACI for short. I don't know what other people call it. Well, basically it is a chart, a RACI chart. It's also known as a RACI Matrix, and sometimes also referred to as a RACI model. It's a diagram actually that identifies the key roles and responsibilities of users against tasks within a project. So I've got a little bit of a chart here just to show you a little bit of legend here to help us to understand what are the four major parts of the RACI, and that's what it stands for, RACI. The first is responsible. Those that are responsible are the individuals who do work with the complete task, right? Those are the ones that are actually performing the work. They're responsible for the work. What about the A, the accountable one? Well, that's the one person. Now, there's just a single person that becomes accountable on that task, and they're the one that makes sure they give the final review. They are ultimately accountable for the performance of that task and getting that task done and making sure that it is correct. So that would be a manager, a supervisor. Also consulted, that's the C. Those people who are providing input into the task but are not necessarily directly involved. They're not necessarily doing the work, but they are providing input. So it could be someone that's more of a consulting role. That's why it's called consultant. There are also other people that need to be informed, but they're not performing any of the work and they're not being consulted on that. In that case, that is the I of RACI, informed. Those are the people who should be kept in the loop on a task, but do not offer feedback or task work. So we're going to develop this RACI. I'm going to show you everything I did to create this, every formula, every conditional format, every line of code, how we got it all to work out. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some email automation onto this so that when we do have different ones, when we do decide to change those roles or update those roles, it'll automatically create an email. That email automation, I'm going to put that inside our Patreon platform. We've got an incredible platform, so many perks and bonuses. So I hope you'll join us for that Patreon. Next week, what I'll be doing is I'll be adding email functionality onto this there. So make sure you get on Patreon for just a few dollars a month. And we've got so many. We've got PDF workbooks where we can show detailed PDF documents of every piece of code that went into that training, along with tons of other perks and documents. We also have downloadable videos. We've got updates and tons more going on our Patreon, so I hope you'll join us there. All right, let's get started with this training because I've got so much to cover. So basically, what we have here is a task here, a task. These columns deal with tasks. So we have also our task categories. So for example, our category here is a proposal. So these specific tasks fall into the proposal. These fall into the inspection. If I were to select one of those, it's going to put that task name, that category, the progress that we've made, and also the due date. We can then change the progress or the due date, and then of course we can also save that, and it's going to save it, and it's automatically going to update that accordingly. We have a selected line. We can delete any task here if we want to. So in each task, and then for each employee, we also have the ability to add and remove employees accordingly. So what we want to do is we want to set that employee for that specific task. We want to give them a specific role. To do that, all we need to do is select on a cell and make sure let them know that that person is responsible, or maybe they're accountable. Now, keep in mind you can only have one. This is why a RACI is so powerful, because we can only have one person that's accountable, but we do need to have one person that is accountable, at least one person that is responsible. If we don't, then we have a problem. Also, we could have a single person who is not only responsible but accountable as well. So for example, this one, notice there's no responsible. We've got some required notes. It's going to tell us, it's going to help guide us and let us know what is required for this task. In this task, we both need somebody who is responsible and required. So if I add somebody who's responsible, now we only need somebody who is accountable, right? So when I add them accountable, a person that is accountable, then this goes to green here, then roles are complete. Now, if I decide to add one more person accountable, which we can't have because we can only have one accountable, then it's going to let us know that we have multiple people that are accountable. So that's a red flag. We cannot have that, but we can have more than one people that are responsible doing the actual work. So we can do the roles complete here. All right, great. So we can also have the same person that is also accountable and responsible. So if we decide we want to clear this role out and we notice that the role is not complete here, well, I'll update that. But we do want to make them responsible. We see that they're now complete. So the role is complete. I'll change that text. That needs to be updated a little bit. So we didn't have somebody accountable. So we need that accountable, right? If we only have that person who is accountable, we need them accountable. So what it's going to do is going to keep track of those particular tasks, and it's going to let us know who is accountable, who is responsible, could be more than one person that is responsible, and of course, who is being consulted and who is being informed. Like I said, this works really well with a project management system. So we've built this RACI around a project manager. Now, this is very, very similar to something we created just a few weeks ago called the Skills Matrix. In fact, I put it on the same workbook because this is what it was that we created. If you didn't catch this video, this lets us know what kind of skills that we have on a per task basis, on a per employee, so we can increase the skills. I did this complete training, but it is now in the same workbook. So you can download this workbook free using the links in the description. Of course, if you want a ton of workbooks, like 200 of them for just $77, you can also pick that up. Okay, so this dynamic skills, they're now in the same workbook because there's a lot of similarities. So I wanted to make sure that you could see the difference and have both in one workbook so that you can compare and contrast those. Many companies will use both a Skills Matrix and a RACI, so they can come in hand, and that's not necessarily either or. All right, so we can also create a new project. We can also load a project on selection, loading different projects. We can also filter projects based on a status. We can filter project based on the project type. So if we have only commercial, we may want to only load commercial types. Okay, so we understand that we've got our listed projects here. We've got our listed tags here. We can also add employees. If, for example, this particular project doesn't have any employees, doesn't have any tasks associated with it, so we can add any type of employee. But if we try to add the same employee twice, that should not be allowed, right? We can only have one employee on it. We need to let us know. So we know we've already added Fred, so we can add a different employee. And we can also add tasks. Now notice we cannot select, there's nothing to select here. It's not going to appear here. We can't assign any roles to this because there are no tasks. Also, I forgot to show you this one. We can also show based on position or based on the name. Okay, so we have that, but we do need to add a task. We need to add a task category. We can select task categories or types here, and then we can just put meeting here. And we can add a status if we want, and we can add a due date if we want. So there's a lot of features in this. So we're going to get to it, and we're going to save that task. So it's going to show both our category and then the meeting. So if we add another one under that category, or we add another one, so let's say we want to do a new one. So now we can have client call, and if we add it into the same category, it's going to appear into the same category. And then we'll make this pending here, and then we can save that task, and it's automatically save proposal and suspension. So now we have both of them there. So it's going to keep adding it based on categories and then sorted accordingly. So we can save in tasks. We can, of course, update our project information here. If we want to update a project description, we can do that here too. Project description. And then we can just save that, and it's going to automatically save. So when I go to another project and then back, it's going to load in all that information, and it's going to keep. So how do we do this? So let's go over a high-level overview, and then we'll get down into it. So in order to make all of this happen, what we need to do is we need to make sure that we have our data stored separately on separate sheets. I need one sheet for our project, another sheet for our employees, another sheet for our tasks, and another fourth one for our RACI roles here. So let's take a look at some of those. So we have an employee list here. This is the same one that we used for our previous one. We have an employee ID and position, and rates and teams we're not using in this. We used those for our skills matrix. And also we used an email, which we'll use a little bit later on in our Patreon update, and our pictures we're going to use. So in this training, we're really going to focus on IDs, name, position, and pictures. That's the part of the table we're using. We also have our projects. Now here's our projects. We have a project ID, a name, a project type, days we will not be using in this specific training, manager, which we do have, status we have, and description we have. So budget and required staff and days we are not using in this training that we did use for our skills matrix training. All right, so we have that together. And so that's basically it for projects, relatively simple. And I also want to know which employees are listed on which project. So we have what's called our RACI employees. So we've got a project ID. So I need to know what project those, the name of the employee, the position of that employee, and also the picture of that employee. That's going to come in through a formula. And so how do we do that? Like if the employee position changes, I want to know. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a formula. We're going to bring down that formula. And that formula is going to bring down for every new employee we add, so that the architect directly comes from our employees. It directly comes from this position here. We're going to pull it in. And we're going to do the same thing with that picture. I want to pull that picture in. Now this picture is just the picture name, right? When we combine this picture name with a specific path, it creates the full path for that picture. And where is the rest of that path? It's located in our admin folder here. Now we have a brand new one called task types here. We have that here, task and type categories. So I've added that in, and that's going to be with a named range here. And let's take a look inside that named range. And it's the name manager. And we have a brand new one called task type. So if we scroll down here, right here, it's called task type. This is an offset. It's going to encompass all those tasks types. So we can change it and update them however we like for all of our projects. So we can create additional dynamic task types. Okay, here's that employee picture that I wanted to show you. This is where the employee pictures are. Now make sure when you get this and you want to update it, and we have a list of employees. Now if you want all of these employees along with the icons here, I'm also providing that, of course, inside our Patreon. So we've got a list for all the pictures here, and we also have a default. So the combined path, this path combined, which is the same path that's right here, that path is the same path, combined with our employee picture name here will allow us to display those employee pictures right here. So we're going to have them displayed right here, which is a nice idea. So we have that inside that. So that's why we have our combined picture. So it is that what I want to do is I want to bring that inside our RACI employees, our sheet called RACI employees here. So we're going to use a formula, and I'm going to use a formula. Basically what it's going to do is I'm going to look up this name. It's going to look up the name. Once the name is found, it's going to match it based on the employee name here. It's going to get us that row. And what are we going to do? We have a named range called employee position. I want to index that employee position. We're going to use a column. That employee position is just another named range on our employees. Here it's called employee position. This is a dynamic. And I've got another one for employee picture here. So let's take a look at the next one. The next one also, again, we're indexing. In this case, we're going to index employee picture. We're going to use the same match. We're basing it on the employee name, and it's going to bring it down. That way, every single time we add a new employee to a new project, it is going to bring down those formulas. I don't want these formulas here because I don't need unnecessary formulas. It slows down the workbook. I only want these formulas here when I add the row. So VBA is going to do that for us. It's going to do the hard work, the heavy lifting. It's going to take this formula, it's going to bring it right down here as we add in the project ID, as we add in the name, as we add in that. And how does that work? Well, let's just take a quick look so I can show you. All I have to do is just select on a project number 5. There's no employees here. If I add an employee here, clicking on add employee, and then we go back into the RACI employees, we see now 5, Dave, Carpenter, the formulas have now been brought in. we have the here number 2 is the employee ID and the database row, the row that's associated with this. So that's how we do it. So as we add employees to our RACI, it is then going to add them to that list so we can bring them back when we load them in. All right, so that's all we need to do there. So we just need to store it here. That'll come in handy. We'll run, all we need to do is to load it is just we run that project ID through an advanced filter. We return our employees and then we bring them in through a macro. Okay, so that's our employee ID. So we have project tasks. These are the tasks that are associated. Now notice we have task ID, which is a unique ID. We have a project ID. So when we do it, let's say we add a task to this one. So let's go back into the RACI and we'll add a task. We'll call this test task so we know exactly what it is. We'll give it any kind of a category and we'll give it a status of pending. We don't need a due date. We're going to save that task. It's going to show that task right here. We can now add our RACI role here. And also if we look in the project task, we see we have got a unique task, a brand new task ID 25. We have that project ID, which is 5. We have that our task name, we have our category, our status, we didn't put a due date on, and we have the database row. Relatively simple. So you see there's a lot of similarities in the way we. Then we have our RACI roles. This is our roles. This is where those roles, those roles is basically this data right here. This data right here. This RA, RA, or RC. So it is all this data here, I need to store somewhere. And in this case, what I need to know is I need to know a few things, right? If I have a role here that's associated, this responsible role is on Fred, I also need to know the project ID number. That project ID is we're going to go through that in just a moment. That project ID is number 1 here. So I need to know the project ID. I also need to know the individual task ID. So we need that task ID because it's assigned. There's 3 things that we really need to know about this. We need to know who it was assigned to, in this case Fred. We need to know what task it was assigned, in this case client meeting. And we also need to know, if I say in this case once more, I'm going to make myself crazy. And then we need to know the project ID. So we need all 3 of those elements. That's very, very important. So we have that stored inside our RACI role database here. So project ID, we have our task ID, we have our employee ID, and we have the employee name. All this is going to help us. Then we have the actual role. What is that? RACI. Notice our roles, and then we have a database row. So we're going to store all 3 of those things. We need all 3 of these things in order to find it. Our project ID is going to let us know what project to put it on. Our task ID is going to let us know what row to put it on. And our employee ID is going to let us know to what column. Right? So we need all 3 of those things. Here, I need to know what row, in this case, row 9, this column here, column I, so that's going to tell us exactly where to place it. So we need all of that. We can also clear a row here if we want to clear it. Okay, great. So we understand now pretty much a high level of how we're going to approach this. And that's it. That's pretty much it as far as where the data is stored. So we're just going to focus on those 4 data. And the idea is to combine all of that data and get it loaded up in here. And of course, any changes that we make to a task get saved back to the database. Any changes that get saved to a project get saved back to the project. Any changes to the employee, if we want to decide we want to remove employee, that also must get removed back in the database. And the same thing with a task. If we want to remove a task, we also need to make sure that this task gets removed with that project, and we can easily remove the task. So we've got all that, and of course we want to be able to alternate between a position showing the position or showing the name of the employee. So we have that, and we may want to sort tasks based on a status. So if we only want to show our pending tasks, we can do that. If we only want to show in progress, I don't even know if we have any. We have 1 in progress. So we can also do that. Lots going on here. But when we have a good foundation of data, right, it's very, very easy to bring it in. Right? And we also have conditional formatting. So let's go and take a quick look at some of the conditional formatting that we have on here, especially this here. We've got a lot that we're going to have on here. So I want to show you what that's like. And of course, we have some alternating row conditional formatting. So I'm going to highlight this and go into the conditional formatting. And we're going to take a look at some of the rules that we have based for our tasks. And the first rule you'll see is based on the highlighted row. So when I highlight a row, and that row number that I select for that task is going to go into B8. So this rule is going to allow us to give it. So all we've done is just give it a background, a fill of that darker blue, and a font of the bold and white color font. When we do that and our row is automatically on B8, it is going to show up like that. And we're going to apply that to the entire row all the way from F through columns A, E. And if we take a look inside B8, we see the select row is 9. So we know that the 9 is going to be the 1. So you'll see as we select 10, that's VBA that's going to take care of that based on selection change, which we'll get into in just a bit. Okay, continuing on with the conditional formatting in those cells, we also have some alternating rows. Take a look at this. This one's based on F8. F8 is not blank, and that means there is a task. Notice our tasks shows up in column F, while our categories show up in column E. So this one is specifically for our tasks. What I want to do then is basically if F8 does not equal empty, then I want to give the dotted lines to the left and the right, left and the right. And if we take a look at this here, we just see the dotted lines border here. We've got that blue dotted lines on the left and the right. So these will take care of that. Now this applies to F8 through G3, F8 through G3. Not doesn't extend all the way from E or through F because I only want it in those. That's how we get this dotted line on all those. And then also what I want is alternating rows. So we notice that there's a light and blue, white. So when I edit this row, we're going to take a look at the two conditions. There's two conditions. For this blue background, what do I want to happen? Well, F8 should not be empty. And notice that it's not just 8. It is for every row below that because 8 doesn't contain the dollar sign. So it's every row below that. And I want it for odd rows. Equals mod of row 2 equals 1. That's for odd rows. So I want to color odd rows that are blue, but only when column F is not empty. So that's going to do it. And I have something similar for the Y one. So here, in the white one, this is for even rows. It's exactly the same, except this is for even rows. And we format that. We see that it's got no fill, but a font, and we've got some borders, but it's just going to be that white. Okay, so that's it for that. All we have to do on that. That's for the even rows. And then also what I want to do is I want to color those categories, right? Categories, notice have that blue color with a bold. So when we edit that row, we know that that's going to be based on column E and then any row starting in row 8. And if that is not empty for our categories, I want to give it that blue color. I want to give it the blue underline, and I want to color it in bold. Okay, so that's how we get our categories. Something very similar here. Also, what we're going to do is selected row here, but this, of course, is going to be based on our selected project, which is 10. So we've got the same conditional formatting, the same rules here for alternating when we have that. So that's our conditional formatting. I also have a little bit of conditional formatting here. I only want to give borders to those cells that contain both employees and tasks. So if we look in here and can do conditional formatting, we manage rules, we see we've got several rules up here, and it's going to be based on the value, of course, the roles that are being placed, and whether they contain an employee or a task. So let's take a look at these two conditions. I want to give it, let's edit the rule, and let's look at the format. I want to give it this border, this bottom blue dotted line border, but only in two instances. When F9, and notice that 9 doesn't have a dollar sign. That means going to be any row starting at 9, and also I through 6. Now notice that there's no dollar sign before I. It's not absolute. That means for every column that it applies to, but only on row 6. This is for our employees. Notice that our employees are all on row 6, starting on column I and going forward. So that's going to mean that that means that we have to have an employee in row 6. We also have to task in column F. If we have those things, then I want to give it that border, that blue dotted line border. And very, very similar here. When we edit the row, we see the same rule here, but in this case, what I want to do is I want to give it that right border. Now this is just a little bit different, so I wanted to make sure that we have separate ones so that they're separate. So I can show you that's the blue border. Great, so we showed us that. That's basically, this is going to be I6. Notice it's I6, a little bit different, and then F9. Okay, also what I want to do is I want to give colors. If it contains I, we're going to give it this dark red and white font. If it's C for consultant, I want to give it the green. Red's going to be for A, and then R are the people that are doing the actual work. Of course, those who are responsible are going to get that dark blue. And then if the same person is going to be doing both responsible and accountable, which is the RA, I want to give it this faded from blue to red. So all I need to do in the fill, and the fill effects is go from blue to red and then make sure that it's vertical. That's the way I want to show for those people who are both responsible and accountable, which is the RA. So it equals RA. And that's all I have to do with conditional formatting. And now we also want to know, again, the highlighted row, which you saw that, and then the category row. So that's it. So the other ones are just continue of the category and the continuation of that highlighted row. So that's it for the conditional formatting. Also, I've got some rules here, So let's take a look at this red flag. How do we do that? It's a little bit more of basically what we're going to be doing is we're going to use some product in this. And some product is going to tell us, I need to know if what is found inside that, right? So basically we're looking for, it's irrelevant as far as those being consulted and those who are being informed. It doesn't really matter. There's no rules that apply to those two, but there are rules that are applied to responsible. At least one person is required to be responsible, and only one person, and one person should be held accountable. So if we have a missing accountable, that should come up as a red flag. If we have a missing responsible, that should be a red flag. If we have just one of those, it can be a yellow flag. Notice we have just someone responsible, but we don't have anybody accountable. So that's got to come in. As soon as we add somebody accountable, it's going to go to the green flag. So how do we do that? Well, first of all, we're going to make sure that F14, if F14 is empty, then just show empty, right? We actually have to have a task. So we want to make sure that there's a task. Now we're going to use the sum product. We're going to use search. What I'm looking for is I want to look for the A. The first thing what I want to do is look for the A. And I want to look, where do I want to look for that A? I want to look for it in that entire row from column I to column AC on that specified row. We're going to add the 0 onto that of it. When we use the sum project along with is number, then we can determine how many are found. How many of those A's are found in that. If it's greater than 1, we're going to just put 0 here, and then that'll come in handy with the conditional formatting. So if it's greater than 1, I want to put 0. 0 is going to be the red flag because we can only have one person accountable. So if this is greater than 1, I need to make sure to let the user know this is going to have the 0 is going to cause a red flag. So also if and okay, there's two conditions now. The sum of the project, we're looking for A is equal to 1, which is correct. If it's equal to 1, that's what I want. I want the number of A's found in that row to be 1. And also, what if we're looking for R? If that is greater than or equal to 1, remember, we need at least one person responsible. So if it's greater than equal to 1, then we are good. This is correct. This is what I want. I want only one person accountable, and I want at least one person responsible. If that is, then I want to put a 2. A 2 is going to denote our green flag. But what about if it's a yellow flag? What would constitute a yellow flag? Two conditions. If the number A is equal to 1, if or, remember this is an or, we're going to do two conditions. If A is equal to 1 and the sum product is greater than equal to 1, then put 1. 1 is going to be for our yellow flag, and that means, let's say we found that there's a 1, in case there's only one A, right? Only one A and no R's, then we're going to put a 1. That would be no R's, because if there's an A and an R, it would show up here, right? An A and an R is correct, it would show up with 2. But I want to know that yellow warning. That means there's only one person that's accountable and no responsible, or perhaps there's only one person responsible and no accountable. Those two instances, so either only one person is accountable, which is that sum product, or there is only one person that's greater than 1 or greater that is responsible. In that case, I'm going to put a 1. A 1 is going to be our yellow flag. A 1 is yellow flag, a 0 is a red flag, and a 2 is our green flag. So now when we escape out of there, we take a look inside our conditional formatting for that. That's exactly what we are going to find in this icon set. We're going to take a look at this icon set here. A 2 greater than or equal to 2 is going to be a green flag. A 1 is going to be that yellow flag, and less than 1 is going to be that red flag. So that's how we apply to it. Now we're going to have very, very similar rules to the text here, but it's a little bit more because I want to let the user know what is required. So the first one, again, if F14 is empty, certainly we don't want to move forward. Now what we're going to do is we're going to check the sum product. We're looking for A's. Here we're going to search for the number of A's in that row. If it's greater than 1, we need to let the user know multiple accounts, right? We cannot have multiple people accountable. We can only have one person accountable, so that's a warning. I want to show, just like it does here, multiple accounted. Okay, but what about another condition? If we're going to search for the number A's equal to 1, and this is going to be an and, right? Two conditions. And 1, the number of person accountable is equal to 1, which is exactly what we want. And we're going to look for R. If R is equal to 0, meaning we have the right number of accountable, but there's nobody that is responsible. It's equal to 0. In that case, I want to put responsible is required, right? We need to have a responsible person. There's another condition. What if we find that the search number is there? This is going to be another and. What if we find that we don't have anybody accountable, meaning it's 0, we're searching for A, 0, and we have the number of R's equal to 1. So we have the number, we could put greater than or equal to 1 in that case. That should be fine, greater than or equal to 1. In that case, we need a count required. Remember, there was one issue with this. This fixes it. So I'll copy this formula. So in this case, we have enough responsible, greater than or equal to 1, but we don't have anybody that's accountable. In that case, I want to put accountable is required. Now what about if we have another account? If and search A is equal to 0, and 2 conditions. 1, there's nobody accountable, right? And what about there's nobody responsible? Also equal to 0. 2 conditions. Then they're both required. In that case, we need someone responsible and we need someone accountable. The message will be responsible, accountable, required. They're both required. We need to both. Okay, otherwise, any other condition, the roles are complete, right? So we've accounted for every other condition here. And that's it. So now once we have that formula, again, all I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the code for a second because it's a selection change. When you have a selection change and you try to copy, it's going to create. So I'm going to copy this. And all I'm going to do is I'm just going to paste that all the way down here, that one little fix. So we have that, paste the formulas, and that's how we get it down. Very good. So now we've done everything. So now we see this one, of course, we have only the informed and only the consulted, but nobody is responsible. Nobody is accountable. So, of course, we're going to need to make that change. So how do we do that? Let's restart the code again so I can get that selection change event there. And then when I select something here and I can make them responsible, now we see here that we have accountable is required. And once we select accountable is required, and we now have the roles complete. So that is how we do it. So that's all how we get both of them. So how do we continue with this? Everything else is going to be based on some VBA code. So we're going to go step by step through all the VBA code. The first one I wanted to show you is this one. How do we get this really cool pop-up to show up, and how do we get that action to come? Well, this pop-up is called the assign role group. I've given it, and all it is basically just some shapes here, just some rectangle shapes here, and I've just colored them. So there's nothing really going on. This is, of course, is just a little icon. So there's nothing special with what I've grouped them together. Make sure that when you're grouping them together, you always want to make sure that you are going to be, I'll say here, move but don't size with cells. Move but don't size with cells. And that way, if for some reason we change the width of the columns or the height of the rows, that shape will not change. So what I want to do is I want this to show up, but I don't want it to show up everywhere. I don't want it to show up if there's no task, and I don't want to show it up if there's no employee. So I want to make sure that it only shows up when there is an employee above and when there's a task to the left, and not on, of course, these categories I don't want to show up. So I only want to show up on tasks and when there's employees. So that comes in on a selection change event. So let's go into the developers and go into the VBA here, Visual Basic here, or Alt F11. And I'm going to show you based on that. So this is called the RACI sheet, RACI sheet. That's what we're going to be focused on. And we're focused on, again, we're going to start with selection change. Worksheet, and then selection changes, however you get to it. Now, if the user makes a selection change anywhere from where, let's take a look at that. It's going to be here in column I8 through AC58. This is one. If the user on selection of any change to any RACI task role, right here. I8 through AC53. So here we have I8. I'm going to increase that. I8 is the first possible one here, right here, but there's nothing here. All the way to AC and then down. In fact, I'm going to make this all the way to 53. That's correct. 53 is the last one we've set up. So we have that there. So once the user makes a selection, then I want to run a check. I want to look in column F. Remember, F is where our tasks are located. This row 6 is where our employees are located. So we're going to check both of those. If F in the target row does not equal empty and cells, we're using cells, row 6 and whatever the target column does not equal empty, only then should we proceed. Ensure that the task and employee name, ensure that there's an existing task and employee name. Only when we have a task and only when we have it do we want to proceed. Then what we want to do is we want to display that group, but I wanted to make sure to display that group of shapes very, very specifically. I want to display it on the next column over and on the next, just to the right of wherever the user is selected, so that its position is variable. Okay, so how do we do that? Well, first of all, the left position of this shape is going to be based on the target row, and it's going to be based on the target column. We could also use offset here. That would work just as well. Plus 1. That means 1 column to the right. That's the left position. What about the top position? The top position is going to be based on that same row plus the target column, top again, top position. So it's basically the same top position of the target row. Then we're going to display it. If we select anything else, I want it hidden. So if it's here and I select something else, I want it hidden automatically. How do we hide it automatically? Well, the first thing we do inside selection changes, if it is visible, if it's currently visible, then hide it. I'm going to do that with several shapes, like the delete employee button and the delete task button. We're doing the exact same thing. So notice the delete task button is visible. If I select anything else, it is going to delete it. In fact, if I select another task, it's also going to be hidden temporarily, and then it's going to be displayed. That's also in selection change. So while we're on selection change, let's continue with the code here on that. So then we're going to do the same thing with delete employee button. If I've selected an employee, notice this button here is called delete employee button. The same with task. This is called delete task button. So I've given names to these groups. So if I select anything else, I want it hidden. I want it hidden automatically. So these 3 lines of code does just that. It says basically, if that group of shapes is visible, then hide it. So we're going to do that. And also what I want to do is I want to select the employee and task rows. Now the employee row, B8 and B7 are associated with those. So if I select employee, I also want this highlighted. If we go into the home, conditional formatting, and manage rules, we see that B7 is based on the selected employee column. B7 is going to equal to column. We're going to give it that same color and look, okay? And that's going to be based on I6. I also want to, if there's an employee, then in this case, I6, I want to make sure that we add in a right here, or at least the right border here. Notice that only when we add employees do we have that border. So notice, let's look on project 8. See, there's no borders here. As soon as I add an employee, I need to make sure I select an employee, that border shows up. So I only want that border showing up when we actually have an employee. That is the conditional formatting that we have added here. So going back inside the conditional formatting and manage those rules, we can see that we have that border. It's based on I6. Now notice again, there's no $sign before the I because we want it relative based on any column within the range starting in column I. So when we format it, we see that we have that right border. And that's going to apply to starting in column I all the way to AC6. All right, so that's it. So that's conditional formatting. And we have also on the selection change, when I select a project, I want to load that project. That's also a selection change event. When we selected, you watching me do this, as I select a project, certain things happen. First of all, we need to highlight the row. We need to know that selected row is going to go inside B2. We also want to run the macro that's going to actually load the project. And that's if the user makes a selection on anywhere from D8 through D99. And we want to make sure that D contains a value. There's a project range. I also want to make sure that we're going to load the right project. So we're going to dimension the found project as a range. We're going to set that found project to projects based on the project name, right? We're looking in a range of all the project names, and I want to find that project. Why do I want to do that? Now, keep in mind that sometimes what I'll do is I'll put the project ID down here. I'll put the project ID down here somewhere hidden. And then if I want to load that project ID, I'll just take whatever's here and I'll place it directly inside B3. But here's another way of doing it. What if I search inside our projects here and I look for the project name? If it's found, I know what row it's found on. Then all I need to do is return whatever's A and that row that it's found on. I can return that and I can place that directly inside B3. So that's exactly what we're doing here. It's a little bit different way. So I want to show you multiple ways of achieving the same result. So this time we're going to search for projects. We're going to search it And we're going to look, what are we looking for? We're looking at the target value, the value that we've selected. We're going to look in Excel values and Excel whole. If it's found, if it's not found, found project is nothing, meaning it's not found. We're going to let them know the project has not been found, or we're exiting the sub. Assuming that it has been found, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take B2 and place that target row. That's going to trigger the conditional formatting. It's going to put that row number directly inside B2 right here. Okay, so we have the row here. That's going to trigger that formatting. Okay, and then continuing on, what I want to do is I want to also put that project ID inside B3. How do we do it? Again, we know it's been found, so we look at the row, found project.row. That's going to return the row that it was found on. So all we need to do is, what is in A in that column? That is our project ID. So this is our project ID. It's going to place it directly inside B3. And then we're going to run the macro, which we're going to get into soon, to actually load those projects. All right, great. But what about on task selection? Notice task selections. That's coming up. When we want task selection, we've got to do a few things. If I select a task, I want to load that task, those task details in here, the name, the category, the status, and of course the due date. And I also want that selected row to go inside. Where do I want? I want to place that directly inside B8. But I want to make sure that when we make a selection change anywhere from F all the way down, I want to make sure there's a value in F. So if the user makes a selection all the way from F9 through H, and they could also select the date, or they may want to select the due date, that would work just fine. So that's why we go all the way from F to H, right? Anything they select is fine, okay, as long as there's a value in F. That's required. And F and the target row doesn't equal F. F must contain a value. Then what are we going to do? We're going to place that row inside B8. That will trigger, let us know what our selected row is and trigger the conditional formatting. And then we want to show that delete task button. That is the button, that little icon and shape that's going to show up. It's going to allow us to delete that task. So we want that to show up, and I want to show that up directly in column E. So we can do that. The left position is going to be based on E in the target row. The top position is also going to be based on E in the target row. And the last thing is I want to display that shape. Again, we're hiding it automatically. I'm hiding that delete task button automatically on any selection, and I'm only showing it under these conditions. The last thing is the second to last thing is on employee selection. When I click on an employee anywhere from I6 to 86, we need to make sure that there's a value, right? If they've selected nothing, we don't want anything to happen here, right? Only when we select an employee do we want that column. I want to display that column directly in B7, and I also want to display that delete employee. It allows us to remove an employee just like that when we click it. We may want to put, are you sure you want to delete the employee? But that's okay. All right, so we have that. So how do we do that? So we want to make sure that there's a value in row 6 in the target column. Put that column in B7 for the conditional formatting. Display the delete employee. This time what I'm displaying it in row 6 and based on the target column and then left. Then I'm going to add 51. Why do I add 51? Because notice our target column is right here. I don't want to place this directly inside our target column, which would be like here. I want to move it over to the right so it stays in line with that diagonal column. This diagonal column, if we go into the home, we can see that we have this particular, the angle counterclockwise. That's how we get it. When we click here, we see that the text is this base there, this angle orientation here, this 45-degree angle. That's how we've done the formatting for those. So I want that X to appear also based on that in the column. So moving it over 51 pixels to the right. To do that, we simply just add 51, and I'm going to base it on the top of the cell and then display it. All right, we've already gone over this part of it, right? We know how to display that. So we've gone over all of the selection change macros. We have just a little bit of a change. When we make a change, we want something to happen. There's only one change event, and that means when the user makes a change event. What type of a change? Well, this type of a change. When they're changing anywhere from D4 to D5, what do I want to do? I want to reload those projects. I only want to list those projects that are perhaps commercial or only those statuses or those types. So we do that. That's based on a change event. If I click here or here, I want something to happen. So all we need to do on any change of D4 through D5, run the macro that's going to load that project list. So we've done just that here. If the user makes a change from D4 to D5, run the macro that's load the project list. So that's it for our worksheet change and our selection change. Now we're going to get into some of the modules. Notice here we have some modules here, project macros and skill matrix macros. Those are due to our previous training, which was on our skill matrix here. So we're going to focus on the three RACIs: RACI macros, RACI tasks, and RACI project macros. Okay, so that's what we want to do in here. So all right, so how do we do that? Well, let's just start out with the first module called RACI macros, and we'll go all the way up to the top, and we're going to RACI role assign. So I'm going to start right here now. And this is the exact macro that's used when we actually assign a role. So when I click R, I want something to happen. Now, I don't want to add in 5 different macros, right? It would be nice to have the same macro automatically used for all these 5. So how are we going to do that? Well, what we can do is we can use shape naming. Shape naming can base on it. So notice the name of this shape is called role_R. This is called role_. Notice that both the icon of that square shape and the rectangle shape have the exact same name. And I've done the same one for accountable here, role, but _A. So this one's A, and the same thing for that shape here. Take a look here, role_A. So all we need to do is determine the shape that clicked on that and remove the role and underscore. And whatever's left, in this case RA, is exactly what's going to be put inside the selected cell. So when I click RA here, it's going to be just that. So by naming our shapes, we can use the same macro, except for the clear role. That's got a different macro. So all 5 of these, whether it's R, responsible, and accountable, consulted, or informed, you're going to use the same macro. And that's the macro that we're going to go over right here. So we're going to focus directly on the RACI sheet here. And the active cell value is going to be, very simply, equal, using the replace. Now, the application caller is the name of the shape that called the macro. And we've went over this before, but I want to know, when you try to run this macro directly from the VBA here, using the run, you're going to get an error always. And I get this question a lot. Why do I get this error? Because we're trying to run it directly from here. Notice that application caller, anytime we use this, there's no shape that, this is looking for the shape that called the macro. There is no shape that called the macro because I called the macro from this button right here. So this will always have an error, which is fine because we're only, just remember, make sure we use a shape to run this macro, and there's no problem. So what is the name of that shape? It is role_, and whatever we want. So what if I remove that role_, and I replace it with nothing using the replace command? What's it going to leave me with? It's going to leave me with whatever role I want to place. That R, that A, that RA, I, or C. It's going to put that directly in the cell. Okay, once I've done that, I've placed it directly in the cell. That's perfect, but now what do I need to do? I not only need to place it here, I need to save it directly in our role database here. I need to save it here, right, in column E. But I need to determine what row has it been saved before. If it's currently has a role database, then I need to know. So how are we going to determine that? Well, that's with the rest of the code. First of all, I need to know if B17 does not equal empty or B17 equals 0, then it's good. What is in B17? Let's take a look inside here so we can see that under our RACI and look at B17. When I select something, take a look at B17. It says that's 98. Right? So here's what I need to know. When I select something, let's take a look at the selection change. You see here that certain things are going to be changing. Right? B14 takes on 1. So how do we get that? Well, what I need to know is remember, I need to know the task ID and I need to know the employee ID. Take a look inside this RACI again. We have the project, we know the project ID, I need to know the task ID, and I need to know the employee ID. Because if it's all found, I need to find the row where this is located on. 1, 1, 1. I need to know the project ID, the task ID, and the employee ID. Remember, all of that is associated with that particular role here in RACI. We have the employee ID, we have the task ID, and I need to know the project ID is going to be here. So how do we get both the employee ID and the task ID? Well, the task ID, when we load that in, we're going to store that someplace. It's going to be located right here in column AH. We take a look over here, we see H. This is where our task ID. When we run the macro, and I'll show this to you soon, when we run the macro to load this project, all the task IDs are going to be loaded in here. Simply put, they're going to go from here They're going to go from here and they're going to be coming into the row. So they're going to be coming in and they're going to be brought directly inside here. So that's how we're going to bring the task ID. Notice it's here. So that's how we're going to bring those in. So we have the task ID, but what about the employee ID? I also need to store the employee ID. The employee ID is going to be down here. As we add employees, the macro that we add employees, the employee ID is going to put in here. So I know the employee ID is going to be located on row 100 in whatever column we have selected. I know that the task ID is going to be located in column AH and whatever row we have selected. So that's the rest of that selection change. So if we look inside here, I'm going to go back into selection change. Here we are back on RACI under selection change. And remember, we had that shape. We were showing that shape. But there were two things that we left off that I'd left off purposely. B14, I want to take on our task ID. That's going to come from AH and whatever row they've selected. The employee ID is going to go into B15, and that's going to come from row 101 and whatever column we have selected. So the employee ID, so both of those values are going to go directly into B14 and B15 here. So as we select it, if it contains a value, notice 3311 here. Here's, we can do 11. So this one's easy because we know exactly where we're going. 111, right? So if we look in our RACI role database, I just happen to know that that's our first row, 111, right? So we know it's empty, right? So there's nothing here. So if I add in a role here, and we take a look at our role, we see now it's got R. So we know it. But what I need to do is I need to get this row number. I need to know that 111 is on row number 4. How do we know that? Because that's unique to the project ID. That's unique to the task and unique to the employee. So a great formula that we can use to get all three of those is called sum product. I need those three. If I'm looking up those three values, what row are all three of those values present on? Only one row possible. In this case, it's row 4. So we can do that with some product formula. So here it is right here. So I've got the selected product. So I need to know all three of these. Now the project ID, that's just simply a link to B3. I just like to have all three of them here. That's why I have it here. Notice when I select a different project, it's going to change. So let's put back in here. So if I have all three of these things, we can use a sum product formula to extract the row. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put that row right here. And this is the formula here. If there's an error, of course, we want blank. We're going to use sum product. I want to know the RACI role. Now I've created 3, let's go with those named range so I can go back into the name range. 3 named range I've created to make it easier for us. And they all start with RACI employee ID, RACI project ID, and RACI task ID. So we only need to look at one, but basically they're the same. We have 3 of them. They're dynamic. One's for the RACI project, one's for the task ID, and one's for the employee ID. There are 3 that are exact right here. Okay, so that's all we need. So they're dynamic. So I've got 3 named ranges, one for the project, task, and employee ID. If I know those 3, all I need to do is look for a match. To find that, we're going to do RACI role. We need to know where is it found word B16, where our project ID is equal to B16. I also want to know where our employee ID is equal to B15 and where our task ID is equal to B14. What are the instances when all 3 of those things are true? If those are all true, then what I want to do is I want to determine the row based on the RACI role project ID. This will get us the row that it's found on. That's all we need to do using sum project. So all 3 of these instances are true where the project ID is equal to B16, where the employee ID is equal to B15, and where the task ID is equal to B14. Return the row that it's found on. And if there's an error, show blank. That's it. That's all I have to do to return the row. So if I select something else here, we see where the task ID is 1, where the employee is 2, it's going to return row 5. In this case here, employee ID is 2, task is 1, project 2, it's going to return row 5. So once I know the row, if I know the row, and what about if it doesn't exist? What if we haven't created it yet? Let's take a look at that. If it doesn't exist, all right, we haven't done anything for this, our result is 0. Notice it's not found, so the result here in B17 is 0. If it's 0, I know it doesn't exist on this database. In that case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add it all the way at the end here, and this is going to be 100. So for that instance, we're going to add a new one. So whenever the result of B17 is 0, it means it has not been added to the database before, so add it. So that's how we can combine and locate it with just some helper cells, some formulas. Then all we need to do is VBA say, oh, if this is 0, add a new one. If it's not, add it to the existing one. That's just what we're going to do as we enter our macro here. So here we are continuing back with our macro. We want to determine, now we understand, is B17, if it's empty, meaning maybe there's an error, it's not found, or if it's 0, we know it is going to be a new, let's type this in, new RACI database row. So in that instance, I want to look a variable role database row equal to RACI database, the first available one, the last one with the value plus 1 is our first available row. Then in column F, I'm just going to put the row. So that means only for new ones here inside our RACI, I'm just going to put in column F here, putting in that row. Everything else gets updated or created regardless if it is the new or an existing ones. But what if it is an existing? What if it's been added before? In that case, the role database row is simply going to be whatever's in B17. That sum product will return that row number. So now we've got the row regardless of whether it's existing or whether it's new. Everything else we're going to do regardless. And now all we need to do is place that project ID inside column A coming from B3. All we need to do is place that task ID coming from AH, of course it could come from B14 just as well. There's 2 different locations. And we also want to put that employee ID also located here coming from row 101 in the active column. And I also want to put the employee name there too. It's going to come from row 6. And whatever role, whether it's RAI or RA, whatever it is, we're going to put that inside column E. So the actual role is going to be put inside column E. Now we've got it stored up. So now we've added all this information or updated it regardless. So that's how we add a role. That's how we save it by using a great sum product formula. Okay, but what if I want to clear the contents? So it's pretty much the simple thing. All we're going to do, again, in this case, all we're going to do is simply clear the contents of the active itself. This is the macro that's tied to the last one here saying clear role. So when I click here, it's going to clear the role. You could just as easily put delete. That would be fine too. But we're going to use clear role because it's more of a specific, and we can do that. So clearing the role is going to do just that. Anything we want to clear, we can clear the role. When we do that, then we understand that we are going to determine if it is a database, right? If it has not been saved in the database for any reason, then we can exit the sub. There's nothing further to do. However, if it has, again, we can do all the same thing, assign the database, and then basically just add everything in, and then in column E, instead of adding whatever we selected, the active cell value, in this case, it's a clear contents, or we could use the active cell value, which is going to be empty anyways. So that's how we both add roles and clear roles. So that macro is the one that has been assigned to this. So if we right click here on anyone, and we can see if we go into the assign macro, sorry, it's off the screen, and then we can see that is the RACI role clear. That is the macro that we just went over. Okay, nice, very nice. So we went over those 2 macros, but what about adding employee? Adding employee, what I want to do when I add an employee, do a few things, is I want to first check to see if the employee has been added first. If it has, let the user know that that employee has been added. When we click add employee, saying the employee has been added already to the project. And then of course select the column so the user can see where it is. So if I try to add, again, Jack, and click add, employees added, I wanted to select Jack so we can see exactly where Jack has been added. If it has not been added, then add it to the first available column in row 6. So we can do that with the following lines of code. To do this, the first thing what I want with our RACI is I want to determine the first available column. So the employee column is going to be AC6, which is the last possible column to the right, and to the left column plus 1. So this will get us the last column with a value to left plus 1 is going to be the first available column. Now what I want to know is if the employee column is less than 9, then make sure to set the minimum, the first column, to 9. Right? If it's less than this is column 8, this is column 9. So I want to make sure that the first possible column is column 9 in case it's less than that. So that's going to set the minimum column number. All right, if the column is greater than 29, we only have maximum of 21 employees. Let the user know a maximum of 21 employees can be added. Of course, you can customize this and add any number of employees you want. All right, assuming that it's now not within it. Now what I want to do is I want to check to see if that employee exists. First of all, if AD5 equals empty, make sure that they have added an employee. AD5 is the cell where they've selected an employee. We need to make sure that this has a value. If it's not, let the user know to please select an employee first. All right, then what I want to do is I want to check for the existing employee. We're going to set the range. This is a range variable, found employee range, based all the way on all possible cells within the row 6, I through AC. That's where all of our employees are going to be found. We're going to look for something. We're going to look for whatever they want to add, which is located in AD5. We're going to look in values and whole. And if it's been found, if not is nothing, those cancel each other out. And that means this means it has been found. It's found already. So let the user know this employee already has been added to the project. Then I want to select it so the user can see directly. Maybe they didn't see, they can't find it. So we're going to let them know. We're going to go row 6, wherever column it's been found on, we're going to select it. That select, it's going to automatically highlight that once it's selected and exiting out of the sub. All right, assuming it's not a duplicate, then we can go ahead and add it. So in row 6, in the employee column that we've just defined up here, we can then add whatever's in AD5. Then what I want to do is I want to set the employee ID. Remember that employee ID also needs to go into 101. Where can we find it? That's going to be located in B13. Let's take a look inside B13. That is going to be an index match formula right here. That's the employee ID. And we're going to use the index based on the employee ID. And we're going to, whatever's in AD5, we're going to match that. That's going to extract the employee ID. Otherwise, it's going to show empty. So we notice that here, Jack Johnson, his employee ID is 6. So now I have the employee ID from the formula, and all I need to do is take that employee ID and place it directly inside whatever's here, the first available row here, whatever column we're adding in. It's going to place that employee ID in row 101, whatever column is associated with that. All right, so that's it. So now we have, then all I want to do is run the macro that we're going to be going over very soon to save the project. And I want to reload the project. That's going to automatically load all the details. So now we know how to add an employee, but how do we remove an employee? We have to have the ability. We have a macro that's been assigned to this button here. We assign the macro, we see there's nothing, but if we click on an individual shape inside that, and then we assign the macro, we see that that's called project delete employee. So when I delete employee, I want to make sure that it is removed from this project. So I also need to remove it from the database. So just like that, we might be able to add. Are you sure you want to delete them? If you want to, you can add that in, no problem. So delete, that's what we're gonna do. So that is what's gonna action. The first thing what I want to do is make sure that we have a selected column. When we select a column, 20 is going to show up here. That's in B7. So if we don't have any column that you just selected, we can exit out of the sub, right? That is required. So we have that, we know the employee column. We're gonna set that into B7 as the employee column. All right, so what I want to do is I want to clear whatever is in row 6 in the employee column, clearing it out. And I also want to make sure that we clear out 101. Actually, we should probably clear out 101 too. I'm going to do that too. I don't think I did that. Clearing out the employee ID is important too. So that's located in row 101. So we're going to clear out the employee ID and we're going to clear out the name. Clear, let's do that, clear employee ID, and we clear out the employee name, clear employee name. Now we have that. So now when I say if cells, now what I need to know, has it been added to the database? If we remember here, database, this is our database row. Our employees, when we add employees, they're inside this table. We need to know the row that they've been added. Once they get added, this row gets moved over. So I need to know, has this employee been saved to database? Because if it has been, I need to remove the row associated with it. So that row is found directly in row 100 right here. So I need to know if this is not empty in row 100, then I need to delete that row from our RACI employee database right here. So we can do that here with the following. If here cells 100 employee does not equal empty, then delete the database row. RACI employee database row is going to equal to whatever's in 100, the employee database row. Then we can delete it from the RACI employee database. This is the database, RACI employee database. This is the row and the colon, and we're going to delete this row, delete database row, although it's relatively obvious. And then what we want to do is we want to clear the contents of 101. I also want to clear the database row here inside that, clearing that database row. Also, I want to hide that delete employee button. That employee button we no longer need. We've just deleted it, so we no longer need to show that button, so we can hide that button. I also want to clear the selected column in B7, and I also want to then save the update the project, run the macro, and load it again. So we're going to run these two macros. Okay, great. That is all we have for our RACI macros. So we've been over already how to delete employees here, how to add employees. Of course, we also know how to add roles to that and how to clear those roles out. Inside our next module is going to be our RACI tasks. We're going to focus on our tasks now. All right, how do we add and update and delete tasks? Well, I want a single macro to load those tasks. So you see here, we've got all of our tasks located here. When I select on a project, I want to load the unique tasks that are associated with that project. And so tasks are going to come directly from this database. So basically, we've got a list of tasks, categories, and I want to determine all of the categories. First thing I want to do is I want to determine all the categories that are associated with a task. So for example, project ID has these 4 categories. Once I know the 4 categories associated with a project, I can then run another advanced filter based on that criteria. So framing, if I put framing here and I run an advanced filter with the criteria here, project ID framing, it is going to return only the tasks associated with framing. If I do that for each one of them, then I can then place them separately inside my RACI. So if I do that with the first one, proposals, it's going to go all 3 proposals. Then I bring them in here. Then I do the next one for inspection, foundation, and framing. So if I do that for all 4 of them, we're going to be able to get all the tasks associated with each task type or category. So that's exactly what we're going to do inside this macro. But the first thing what we want to do is we want to clear out all the data, right? We want to clear out all the way from E all the way and including AH as well, right? I want to know the database rows that are associated with the task. We do need to clear those out as well. So that's the first step we're going to do is clear those contents. So with our RACI, EA through AC, we're going to clear all those out, and AH through H98. That's going to clear all the existing data and the database rows. Then what we want to do is we certainly need a project ID. That's located in B3. If we don't have any project ID for whatever reason, we can exit the sub out. Project ID is required. I want to set that initial row, that task row is row 8, that initial row right here as 8. As we add tasks, it'll increase, but I need to set the initial row to 8 so I know where to place that first category. So once I have that, we're going to focus on, now we're focused on our project task database. That is the database that's located here. A lot of the work is coming here. First thing I want to do, this we have already placed. This project is linked to whatever's in RACI and B3. So we don't need to place using VBA because it's automatically linked to whatever's in B3. So all we need to do is run an advanced filter, determine the last row, and I want to determine all of the categories based on this project ID. And I want to put those directly here in P3. So that's with an advanced filter. So that's the first thing. First thing I want to do is determine the last row of this database. If it's less than 4, we're going to exit this sub. Also keep in mind now, you'll notice that I started doing this a lot. I'm going to try to do this moving forward. The first 2 rows as header. And why is that important? Because when I delete, generally the way I do things, and you may want to copy this, is I might delete a row, but I don't want to delete formulas here, right? So if I use formulas in that first criteria row, I want to start our database on row 4 and not 3. So I'm going to try to do this more often. Sometimes we have data mapping in row 1. When we don't, I'm just going to use this. So I like 2 rows for the header, and that way when we delete, nothing important gets deleted. But if I were to delete row 3, so I think this is a better way going forward. So keep that in mind. Try to do that, especially if you've got criteria here. Formulas we wouldn't want to delete. So if this header row was in line 2 and our first row of data was in row 3 and we deleted it, it would delete these formulas, creating bugs. So we don't want to do that. So having 2 rows for our headers is a safe way to go for that. So the first thing we want to do is run that advanced filter based on B3 through D. Right? Our B3, I only want to know B3 through D. Project ID and category is really all I want to focus on because I just want that unique category list. And I want that unique category list to come in column P, and the criteria is only K2 through K3. Only that project ID is our criteria. So our criteria here in our advanced filter, K2 through K3. And our results are going to come P2. This is our unique categories. I'm going to put down here unique project because they're only for that project categories. Once I have these, I need to determine the last row of those, the last row of those categories, the last results row. If it's less than 3, that means we have no categories. We can't maybe there's no categories associated with this. We can exit this up. That means there's no tasks, no categories, nothing. So we want to make sure if it's less than 3, but if it's not, then what I'm going to do is I'm going to loop from 3 to the last results row. So if the for result row equals 3 to the last results row, we're going to loop through those. The first thing what I want to do is I want to take whatever's located in P in our row, and I want to place it directly inside M3. So that's what we do here. M3 is going to take on whatever's P in the results row. I'm going to set that category criteria. Then I'm going to ready to run that advanced filter. Now that advanced filter is going to, this time is going to encompass all the data. So we're starting on column A and going all the way through G and A3 through G. Our criteria is going to be all the criteria. Now, why does it include this status? Notice that I also need this status for this. Let's take a look back on our RACI. And we're going to take a look, this one here, pending. What I want to do is I only want to show pending, right? So if we take a look at this and we take a look at the format control, we see that this is based on B12. B12. If we take a look in B12, we see that B12 is a 2, right? But what I want to do is I want to convert this 2 into an actual criteria. I want to show pending. How are we going to get that? Well, if we take a look inside our statuses right here, we see that on row 5, our second one here is pending, right? Pending. So that's what I want to do. So what do I mean by that? Let's go back into our project task. So I want to basically, what I want is a formula that's going to show pending, right? Notice the status pending. That's going to return only our pending. So we can do that with index. We're indexing all the project status with all. Project status is a named range. So formula name manager, project status with all. If we take a look at that, all the way down right here, project status with all here, and we go into Amazon, includes the all status and pending. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a formula and determine what row is this. If it's the second one, then I know it's row. So that's what our formula is going to do based on that named range. So we're going to run an index based on that named range that you just saw. Then what I want to do is I want to determine the row. What is the row? The row is based on B12. Remember, it was 2. So if I run an index based on that and I return 2, it is going to return, if it's equal to all statuses, then show empty. Anything else, basically show whatever is in that. That's how we can return the pending. So if it's all statuses, show nothing. So when I change this here inside RACI, if I change this to all statuses, then it's going to automatically show. And if we right click here and we assign macro, we see that the project load task, it is that macro that's been assigned. So every time we change it, it's going to automatically load those tasks. Okay, so that's how we get our criteria here. That's how we get out. So we run our advanced filter based on all of that criteria, based on a project ID, based on any status, and based on the category. So we can only, so this is our criteria on our new advanced filter from K2 all the way through M3. And then I want the results to go right in here from S through W. I want those results to go here. So continuing on with our macro and our second advanced filter. So AG through A3 through G, our criteria is K2 through M3, and our results are going to come through S2 through W. So that's all we have to do here. S2 through W3 equals true. There we go. So that's all we need to do to get those results. Once I have those results, I need to determine the last row based on column S. That's the last results row. If it's less than 3, we're going to go to the next category. Remember, we're going to skip down here and go to the next category because we're inside a loop, looping through all of the categories. If it does have data, we are going to set the category. RACI E here, I think we're already in RACI. So RACI, we got to go back inside because we're already in our projects database here. E is going to take on that category name, whatever's in M3. So therefore, it's going to take on. So that's going to put that category, it's going to place it directly right here inside E. Now I need to increment the row 1. So we have our E is going to take on that first category. Then we need to increment the row. So that's what we do here. Task row equals task row plus 1. We're going to increment the task row. Now what I'm going to determine is the rate. So now F through H here. Now I want to place F all the way through H. I want to place the task, the status, and the due date. This should say due date, not due, or that's fine, due date, but you get the due date. Due date, let's put that in due date so it's a little more clear. So we have the due date here, and I want to have all of that information come directly from, so it's going to come from our results. So here we have our task, our status, and our due date. So T through V is going to come directly in. That's our next line of code. T through V in the last results row is going to equal F. So it starts out, but I want to bring them all in, right? It's going to be the task row plus the task row plus the last results row minus 3. What does that mean? Well, if I'm returning 1, right, I want 1 row, then I need to subtract 3, right? 3, our last results row is 3, minus 3 is going to be 0, right? 3 minus 3 is 0. So in this particular case, this is going to be 0. So it's going to be our task row plus our task row. So we only have 1 row. So task row plus task row, 1 row of data. That's what I want. If there's 2 rows of data, this will be 4 minus 3 will be 1. So 1 plus our task row. It's going to be 2 rows of data. So this will take in all of the data, regardless of how many results here. It's going to bring in all that data, and it's going to bring it directly inside here. So it's going to bring it all the way in here. All right, next up, what I want to do is I want to add in those database row. However many database, I want to put that in AH. And that is going to come directly from here in column W. So that's the next line of code. AH and the task row, same thing, the task row plus the last results row minus 3 is going to equal W through 3. It's going to bring in all the task IDs. Once I have that, what I need to do is I need to update that task row. The task row, I want to know the next task row, right? So I want to get it ready for the next. So if I've brought in 3 tasks, I need to set that next row to 12. So to do that, we use this. Task row is equal to whatever currently is, plus the last results row minus 2. So this is basically going to say, because why is that? Because I want to add in however many tasks that have been returned. I want to increase that. So if we take a look here, we have just 1 result. We're going to increase it minus 2, and that's going to be 1. So 3 minus 2 is equal to 1. So we're going to increase it 3 minus 2. Whatever the task row currently is plus 1. So that'll increment it just 1 because we've only had 1 result. All right, so that's it. That's all we have to do. It's going to loop through that through every single category as it loops through all the categories, putting each category in here and then getting those results and then bringing those results here. So that's how we have it. But as you'll see, our role data is still missing. So we need to get that in here. Let's just update that. So before we end this macro that we're on, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back into the project. This is the last one we'll be going over. I've got one called RACI Pro, this macro right here, RACI Project, load those roles. That's what I want. That's a macro that I want to run. I want to run that when I update those tasks. So before the end of this, we're going to run that. Okay, continuing on. So it's going to loop through all those categories there. Once we've done that, I want to clear any task details. All those task details we need to clear, right? I want to clear all this information in case we have a task that's updated. I want to make sure we clear all of that so that we can select it. Any selected task row must be cleared, and so on and so forth. So we clear all of that out. And I also want if the delete task is still displayed, I want to make sure that we also clear that out. That shape there should be hidden. And I also want to now, again, load those roles, right? So now when I change it to pending or something, it's also going to load the roles automatically associated with that, just like that. Okay, great. So now we know how we're going to load these and load these tasks all up and bring all that data in here. So continuing on, what about if I want to add or update a task? And what I mean by add, update, if I select a task, I may want to update its category and perhaps its status. So if I want to do that, I can do that and then just save it, and it's going to automatically save it and it's going to go there. Okay, so now we have it under estimate here. So how do we do that? I want to save it, but also the same thing, if I want to click here and I want to save a brand new one, what if I want to enter a new one? I also want to be able to enter a new one using the same macro. So let's say we have inspection here, and we do the category, just enter category inspection, and then the status here in progress, and then we save that task. I want to make sure to save it so that it's automatically saved, so that the same macro is either going to save or update it. So how are we going to do that? And it's right here, the one we just did. So we can do that with this macro called here project add or update, RACI project add or update task. Okay, so inside this macro, the first thing what I want to do is I want to determine to make sure that we actually have selected a task and we have a proper task category. I want to make sure that G3 and G4 contain values. If either one of those are empty, I want to make sure to let the user know to please add in a task name and category. Okay, assuming they have both of those, I also want to make sure to see if B10 is empty. B10, of course, is our task row. Now, if we take a look inside our task row, it is going to be an index match based on our task ID. Our B9 is going to take on, every time we select a task, B9 is going to take on that task ID. Our task row is going to be using a match to determine what row it is on. If it is empty, then we know it is, like when we save it, right? It goes to empty. We want to clear that out. Notice it's going to be cleared out. Notice it means clear. So if, in this case, if we add a task name, we know that our task row B10 is empty. We know it's a new one. So B10 is going to tell us whether it is new or an existing. So if B10 equals empty, then it is called this a new task, new task. So what do we want to do for a new task? Well, I want to determine the task row. It's going to be based on whatever they've selected. I wanted to know the first available. This is based on, this isn't right here, the first available task row inside the database. Oh, the task row, sorry. We don't really need that. Actually, I'm going to remove that. We don't need that. In this case, we have a task database row. That's the one we really want to focus on. So this is the one I need. Task database row, the first available row inside our task, because it is a new one. So we look at a project task, and it would be 28 here. 28 is the one we're looking for. So our first available task database row, our task ID is going to be in B11. B11 would be our next task ID using the max formula as our next task. Maximum of the task ID, all the task IDs, plus 1. If there's no data at all, it would return an error. Therefore, I want just 1. So that is going to give us our next task ID. We want unique IDs for each task. So we use the max formula to help us with that. B11 will take on our task ID. It is exactly that we want to put inside column A. So A is going to take on our task ID, B is going to take on the project ID, and then G is going to take on the database row. Everything else, all 4 of these other columns, are going to get updated regardless of whether it is a new task or an existing task. So right here, task ID is going to come from B11. Our task database row, the first available database row. First available row. So now that we have that, we're also going to get our task ID is going to be located in AH. I want to place that task ID, the one that we've just created here, inside AH. So not only do I need to put it inside here, I also need to take that same task ID and I want to put it directly in AH for the new ones. Got to take on the task ID. So we're putting it there as well. Then I want to update at column A with the task ID, B is the project ID, those won't change, and G is the database row. So everything else, C, D, E, and F are going to be regardless. So if it is an existing task, then we're just going to get our task database row from B10. Also, we can also get it directly from here too as well. So we've got it in both locations. That can help us. But B10 will take on our row. So we have our row. This is just our ID here. So we're going to get our row. I want to know that row. It's going to be located in B10. So that's for existing. Everything else we're going to do regardless. And that's going to be up to the project name, the project category, the status, and the due date. Those are going to all come from the individual cells and update. And then lastly, we're just simply going to reload those project tasks, right? I want to run the macro that's going to reload. After we save it, whether it's new or existing, we're going to run it so that automatically it updates. There we go. So now you see it's automatically updated, and so are results. Okay, great. So we have that. So that's how we update the task. It's going to get both loaded inside our room. But what about if we want to load a task, right? That's a simple macro. If I select on a specific task, that's going to be based on selection change. If I select, I want to load that information up here. I want to bring that information. I want to bring the task ID directly inside B9. So that's going to be based on selection change. We went over it briefly on selection change here inside the task. If the user selects a task here on task selection, we're going to run that macro to load the task. That is the macro that we're going over right now. We went over everything else. So it is that macro. We're going to focus on the RACI sheet. And if B8 is empty, B8 is our selected row. If we don't have the row, if I don't have that row in B8, 15, 16, whatever it is, if we see that, I can't go for it. I must have that row located in B8. So if it's empty, we'll exit the sub. If it's not empty, I'm going to put that inside a variable called task row. Then what I want to do is I want to check for that task ID. If that is empty and located in AH, then we can also exit the sub. So I can put in, use the variable that we just put in. Instead of this, we'll call it task row. Okay, so if AH and the task row is empty, then exit the sub on no task ID. B9 is going to take on AH. Remember, this is where we add in the task ID directly in B9. That's where our task ID is going to come directly from whatever's in AH. It's coming from there in the selected row, going to bring it directly over. This ID brought in will automatically generate the task row based on that match formula and put it right here. All right, so once we have that, then all I need to do is bring everything up. So G3 is going to take on whatever's in F. G4 is going to take on whatever's in the category, right? Now, I don't know, we don't have the category here, right? It's all the way up here. So how do we get the category? If I know the row, if I know the task row is located here, all I need to do is look in the project tasks. I know the row, and all I need to do is look at column D and whatever's in column D in our row and place that inside. So that is going to be placed directly inside here, inside G4. So G4 is going to take on whatever's in the project database, D, and whatever's in B10 value. This is what our task database row is, task category. It comes from the task database. It's much easier. It's much easier than finding where it is up here, right? Much easier. Otherwise, we'd have to look up. So a lot easier. All right, so now that we have the task, the status is going to come directly from column G. The due date is going to come directly from column H. So it's going to bring in G and H. It's going to bring those right here and right here. All right, so that's it. So that's how we load it up. So that's going to load the task. What about if we want to delete the task? That's, of course, the last macro inside this module. That's relatively simple. If I want to delete a task, all I need to do is select this. If just to double check, we're going to make sure that, of course, we have an ID here. We're going to place it here to determine the row here. Once I get the row, of course, I know the row once we selected it, B12. Inside here, excuse me, B10, that's what our row is. So we do that. If let them know, are you sure you want to delete this task? Yes or no. If no, exit the sub. B10 is empty, also exit the sub. I've got to have that database row in B10. If it's empty, we're going to exit the sub. Oh, you're going to put that inside a variable task database row from there. And then all we need to do is delete that using the project task database row, and colon, and entire row delete. And then we're going to reload that project, reload the entire project, which is going to reload everything. So if I want to delete something, all I need to do is just select it, say yes on the confirmation. It's going to delete that, and the entire project is going to be reloaded automatically, just like that. Okay, and the task is now gone. All right, so we understand how to delete the task. That is it for all the task database. In our last module, we have just a few macros. We're going to run how to save and load. This module, we are going to focus on our project, the RACI project. This is the last module. We won't go over this. We'll go over these variables as we go through the macro. So the first thing what I want is I want to load the project list. That is this project list. This is the macro that runs when we change this. I want to load all of the projects based on any filters. Now notice there's some filters pending. I want to know only those projects that are pending. There's no pending. Maybe there's some that are estimated. So I want to use some criteria here from an advanced filter. And that's going to be based on our project database. So this was for our skills matrix. This is for our RACI. We're using the same database that we did for our skills. Remember, our skills was here, right? So now we're focused on the RACI. So our projects, we're using the same database. But keep in mind that this is the criteria we're going to focus on. And again, with formulas, we can do that. So what is the type? The type is showing empty right now. Why is it showing empty? Because we're showing all types. So if D5 equals all types, then show empty. So if D5, the RACI D5 admin equals admin G4, what's in G4? Well, G4 is right here, all types, right? So, and I also want to know all statuses, right? So we can do that just right here. So if it's equal to that, then we just show empty. And then the same thing here. If RACI equals admin E4 is located right here, all statuses, then show empty. If it's all types or all statuses, then show it empty. Otherwise, show whatever's in there. So now we have estimates. So we see inside the projects, we want to show estimates because it's that estimate that we have selected right here. Estimate. Okay, so now we only want to show estimates. Then all we need to do is determine the last row. Run an advanced filter here. O2 through P3. Then we want those results to come here. Whatever results here, I'm just going to bring them directly inside here. But the first thing we want to do is clear out the contents before we load the project. So that's what we do inside there. The RACI B2, I want to clear out any selected row, B2. Also D8 through D99, clear the contents existing projects. Then with the projects, determine the last row. If it's less than 3, we're going to exit the sub. I think that should be 4. Let's see what I put projects on. projects was on. Yep, it should be 4. Okay, so it should be 4. If it's less than 4, then exit the sub out. So now what we want to do is have our data A3 through I, the advanced filter. Our criteria, again, is O2 through P, and our results are in Q2. Then we determine the last results row using column Q. If it's less than 3, 3 is correct in this case, exit the sub. Then all we need to do is bring in our data, D8 through D in the last results row plus 5. I've had a few questions. Why do we add 5? Well, remember, we're starting on row 8 here. Our data is coming from row 3 here. The difference between these two rows is 5, so we need to add 5 to compensate for that difference. That's going to bring over our list of projects. Okay, that's it. That's all we have to do is load our list. The next macro I want to focus on is project new. Relatively simple. When I click this button, that macro is going to run. It's going to clear everything out. It's going to clear all those pictures out. Notice the pictures. It's going to clear everything out. So when I select it, I want to clear everything out on that. So how are we going to do that? Let's return back to our all list here. Let's go with our all statuses here and our main. So what I want to do is I want to clear out one. I'm going to make this faster too. Notice it's a little bit slow. By the time you get it, it'll be a little bit faster. It's simple. We're just going to make sure the screen updating is false and calculations are turned off while the macro is running. So how do we do that? Well, the first thing what I want to do is I want to clear all of these pictures. Now we're going to get into how to create these pictures, but keep in mind that every single picture here contains the word employee pick. Employee pick 11, employee pick 12, employee pick 13, and so on and so forth. So if I know that every of those ones include, so I can remove all, I'm going to look for all the pictures that include employee pick and delete them. So we can do that here. So project for each employee pick is a shape that we've defined here. So when you look up here, we see employee pick as a shape. It's dimensioned as a shape. If using the in-string command, employee pick name, if it includes employee pictures greater than 0, then delete it. Then all we need to do is just simply clear the contents of a bunch of cells. So that's it for our project new. Nothing else we need to do. What about when I want to save the project? That's the macro that's going to run here. When we click Save Project, it is that macro that we're going to run. So what do we do with that? Well, that's relatively simple. Well, we need to make sure that there's a project name. So if P3, that's where our project name is. If that's empty, we need to let the user know to please make sure to assign a project name before saving, and then we're going to exit the sub out. We're going to turn off application screen updating, and we're going to turn calculations to manual. This is going to make it a lot faster. We just need to ensure before the macro ends that we turn them both back on to true and automatic. Okay, so in this macro, the first thing what we're going to do is I'm going to determine, is it a new project or is it an existing project, right? B4 is going to tell us that. Our project row, using that match based on our project ID, as soon as we click new project, we see that B4 is empty. There's no project, but as soon as we select an existing project, B4 changes to the project row. So B4 is going to determine whether it is new or an existing. So if B4 equals empty, then it's a new project. Else, it's an existing project. For new projects, we want to do a few things. I want to determine that project row. It's going to be that first available row based on our project sheets. We also want to take in whatever our next project ID, our next project using our, just like we did with the task, our next project ID located in B5 is going to use that max formula. This should say max equals, that's just not good. That's not going to help us. Equals if error maximum based on the project ID, and it's going to be +1, right? We need to add 1. If it's an error, we're going to show 1 because we would want that to be our initial project ID. Okay, in this case, 13 is our next project ID using that max formula. And we're going to take this and we're going to put it directly inside B3 for our new project ID. So that's what we do right here. B3 is going to take on whatever's in B5. I also want to take that and put it in column A of our project. It's going to set that project ID. We're going to put that directly inside column A here, right here. 13 will be our next one using column A. All right, so assuming we have that, if it's a new one, that's all we need to do for new. If it's an existing, we're just going to extract that project row directly from B4. Everything else is the same. Now, we're not using data mapping in this case, right? Let's see, it's about 5 rows. Data mapping takes 3 rows, so we've got a little bit of an extra, but not too much data. I did use data mapping. Remember, we do have data mapping here. This data mapping was for our skills matrix, right? This is map that data to here. So we had a little bit more data. Now, let's say we did I've had a few questions. Well, what if I want to do data mapping on 2 sheets? Well, all I would do with that is use a different row. I could use row 1 here, and I could use row 2 for data mapping. So I could use 2 different rows. All I would need to do is just drop this down and add 1 more row of data mapping to do that. So I could do that too, but I just chose not to because it wasn't so much data. It was just 5 lines of code. But remember, data mapping would only take 3 lines of code. For loop, our for column, for column 2 to last column, then our data updating, and then our next column. But here we just have a few lines of code bringing the data lines B, C, E, and F. Okay, so that's going to bring in. Now we're not using, in this case, we're not using days, we're not using budget, I'm not using required staff, so we don't need that. That was for our skills matrix here. We did need all of that here, right? Days and required staff, so we did that. That's why it's there. Okay, so we're just using a little bit, so that's all we have to do. Now what about, that's going to make sure that we save all of the project information. Now what about our update our assign employees and RACI roles, right? I want to update any employees here, all the employees here from column 9 all the way to the last one. I want to make sure their information gets saved inside our employee RACI database, right? I want to save the project ID, the employee name, the position, the picture, and ID, and the database row here. So I want to make sure all that is saved inside the database associated there. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to run a loop from 9 to the last possible row, 9 through 29. And then as soon as it's empty, as soon as we have an empty cell, like this would be our first empty cell, as soon as it's empty, we're just going to exit out of that for next loop. So all we have to do is that. If cells 6, row 6, and then column equals empty, then we're going to exit the for. So as soon as there's an empty, we can exit out because they're always in order. Now, I also want to do, is it a new one or is it an existing one? Now, that database row of that rate is right here. So if it's a new, it's going to be here if it's existing. So I want to see if it's new or existing. If it's new, like these here, we would want to make sure to save those inside the database row. So we're just going to check on those here. So I also need to clear these out. Notice this one, these should be cleared out. I'm going to make sure on project load, we need to now clear out. Originally, I had a formula here based on the employee name up here, but then what I wanted to do is I wanted to switch position. So the formula was no longer helpful because I wanted to be able to switch the position. So that's when I used I'm going to actually clear out this also. So I want to make sure we're going to be clearing out everything here from I through 100 because there's no longer a formula here. So we'll just do that on new project right here. Remember that new project? I want to make sure it's all the way to 101. Now we're going to clear out 101. And the same thing for project load. We'll get to that next. That's going to come up next. I want to do 101 as well. Okay, so we got that covered because that shouldn't be there. All right, so continuing on. So what I want to do is I want to check if it's empty, then it's a new database row. Generally, we're going to have, I want to know, is there a database row? If there's a database row that is associated, remember that's the database row here, 4, 5, 6. Then all we need to do is update the information inside there if it's not. So let's take a look at that. So if it's empty, then we need to assign a new one. The RACI employee row is going to be the first available database row inside that database. Inside cells, the row 100, we're going to place that database row. I need to place that brand new row right here inside row 100, that database row. That next row is going to come, in this case, it would be 30. It would be put directly inside here, inside 100. Okay, so we have that. Now what I want to do is I want to take that project ID and I want to put that in the first column. That project ID must go here, right inside here, inside our employees. I want to put that project ID here so I know what project ID has been associated. Next up, what I want to do is I want to copy the formulas. Remember, we have formulas that are going to display the employee position. They're going to display the employee picture. And I remember I said I don't want to have these here unless we're actually creating a new employee. So I'm going to take those formulas. I'm going to bring them right down here into C and D. So we do just that here. We're going to copy what's in C1 through D1, and we're going to place it directly inside C through D, and then paste special. We're going to paste those formulas in here. We're going to paste employee position, and we're going to place in picture names. So we have that there. So that's going to put in the picture names, and then we're done with the copy and paste, so we can turn off the dancing ants by turning application cut copy mode to false. And then what I want to do is the last thing, also for brand new ones, I want to set that row. It's going to be in column F. All right, else it's an existing employee. In this case, all we need to do is extract that database row from row 100 of the employee column. The two other things, placing the employee name, and placing the employee ID are going to be regardless of whether it is a new employee or an existing. We're going to place that name right in column B, and we're going to place that ID in column E. B and E is all we need to do to update that. All right, so the employee ID is going to come directly from row 101. We place that. Remember, we place that as soon as we add that employee ID gets placed right there. All right, so that's it. So we just loop through all the employees to make sure that all the data is saved. Then what we want to do is we want to update that project name. In case there's a change, right, I want to make sure that we've updated the project name. If I change that project name, I want to make sure that it gets also updated here. So when I select a project, let's say I have project 5, and I want to change that inside here, project 5. I want to change this, let's just to inspection for site, and then I want to save that project. I want to make sure that that project name also gets saved here. Notice it got automatically saved. Now it's inspection for site. So, or we can change it to site inspection. I'll show you again. And then saving that automatically is going to update whatever's in D and the row here. So to do that, we just say if B2, the value, does not equal empty, making sure that we have a row, then D and B2 means the row that's associated, that is the selected row, in this case D11. We want to change D11. I want to change it to whatever's in P3. That is going to update that project name right here without having to reload all the projects again. That's it. And then we turn on application screen updating it true, and then calculation automatic. Okay, next up is the project load. This is the main macro that we use when we run this. That's going to load up our project. So how do we do that? Well, I'm going to make it a little bit faster too. Well, what do I want to do? The first thing I want to do is clear all the contents, right? Clear all the selected rows, all of the tasks, all the project details, all the rows. So we're going to clear all that out in this line. And then what I want to do is I want to clear out all the employee pictures. Again, just like we did before, we're going to look for every single shape on the sheet. And we're going to loop through every shape. If that shape includes the text employee picture, then we're going to delete it using the in-string command. If it's greater than 0, that means it's contained in the name of that shape. We're going to delete it. Next up, also, if B4 is empty, we must have a correct project row. We can't load a project if there's no row associated with. So we need to let the user know to please select a product. We're going to turn off application screen updating to false and manual, right? That's going to help things make a little bit faster, although we'll be speeding it up. I also want to load then the project details just as we did before. We're going to set the project row. It's going to be based on B4. Then we're going to basically bring in our project name from column B, type from C, manager from E, status from F, and description E. It's going to put all that information. So we're just bringing that all information, bringing it into these fields, and it's going to come directly from these rows. We're just bringing all that information into this. Once we have there, then we are ready to load in our project tasks. And we've already been over this macro. Remember, we had this macro. Let's just go briefly over it. We went over that, loading those project tasks. We go and click definition. It is that project task where we cleared out all the data and we brought in all of those tasks directly. So that's already in a macro that we covered. Relatively easy. So we're loading the project task. Next up, what I want to do is I want to load in the employees and the pictures. This is the slow part because we have to go through and we also have to load in all these roles. So we'll go into that. So we're going to bring in all the employees. Now what I want to do is I want to run an advanced filter based on employees, but I only want those employees that are associated with this project ID. So we're going to run a criteria based on a linked cell to B3. That is our project ID. So we need to determine the last row. That's the first thing we're going to do inside our employee database. Getting our last row, and then if it's less than 4, going to no employees, we're going to run our advanced filter based on our criteria and bringing that criteria all the way from J through M. So bringing the employee name, picture, the employee ID, and the database row, bringing all of that in there, and then determining the last row of our results. This is, in this case, it's 17, and that's going to be based on column J. So J is going to take on our last results row. If that's less than 3, we're going to skip all this and go to no employees down here. If we have employees, then we can continue on. So we can do an employee column. We're going to set that initial employee column is to 9. Right? I want to know that initial column. It's going to increment just like we did the tasks. In this case, we want to know 9, that first column. As we move to the right, we're going to increment it. So we get our first initial column to the right. And we're going to set the picture folder. I need to know that's an O5. Setting our employee picture folder. Remember, inside our admin screen is where our picture folder is located. Right here, that's where our pictures are located in O5. So we have that folder. We're going to add a backslash onto that. Once we have that, I'm going to run our results. Our results are from 3 to the last results row. We're going to need to extract that employee information from 3 all the way to the last row, getting their name, getting the employee ID. Remember, I said we're not going to use a formula. We're going to take this. I'm going to place this directly inside the row here, 101. And okay, so the first thing we want to do is want to take that employee name and place it in row 6 and whatever the employee column is. It's going to come from J. I want to put that employee ID in row 101, and I want to put the database row from M into 100. So again, we have the employee ID in 101, the employee database row in 100. That's going to come directly over here. The database row in row 100, the employee ID, and notice how it's correct now, in coming into 101. So we just bring that information directly in there. It's going to be, you can hide it, of course. All right, so once we have that information in, then what I want to do is I want to determine, is there a picture, right? If there's a picture, I want to display that picture. I want to display it directly in row 7. So how do we know if there's a picture? We're going to look in column K. If K contains a value and we combine K with our folder path, we get a full file path and we check to see if it's accurate. So if it is empty, we're going to just skip a whole picture, right? We're going to go to the next employee. But if it's not empty, we do want to add it. So that picture file is going to be inside a string variable based on what is in column K. That's just the file name in itself. I'm going to combine that picture file with the folder. It's going to get us our full picture path. Now, to make sure, we want to make sure that is correct. So we're going to use that directory command. And if the picture path VB directory equals empty, then go to next. Again, if there's something wrong with the path, we're just going to skip all of this. If there's nothing wrong and it's the correct path, then I want to insert that picture. But we don't necessarily want to insert. What we do is we already have a sample shape and we just want to add it. So we have the shape here. If we take a look at this particular shape here, it's kind of small. You see it all over here. It's called employee sample picture. This is everything I want. All I want to do is I want to take that picture. I want to change the background. It's just like going into the format picture and we go to fill and we want to fill it from a file. So we insert from a file, we'll click file, and it's going to insert a picture wherever we'd want to put that picture. We're going to do the same thing we're going to do to VBA. We're filling it with a picture file. And we're using this sample. Notice this sample doesn't contain the word employee pick, right? It's smaller, employee sample, right? Because I don't want this sample deleted when we delete the others. And I'll put this sample right here. So I'm going to duplicate this sample. And then with that duplication, I'm going to rename it, give it a full name, and then give it the column. I'm just going to use the column 9, 10. Notice it takes on the column 11. And then what we're going to do is we're going to do it. Okay, so we've checked to make sure that it is an accurate path. If it is, what we're going to do is we're going to take that sample picture here. We're going to duplicate it. We're going to assign a unique name to that. It's going to be the employee pick and whatever they call them. That's that unique name. Once we have that, we can work with it. So with RACI, the shapes, this brand new shape that we have, I'm going to place it directly on the left in row 7 on the left, moving a little bit off the row to the left and a little bit off the top. So it's going to go directly in that same column. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill it with the user picture. I'm going to fill that picture with the user picture. That's all we have to do. And then we increment the employee column by 1. That's it. That's all we have to do to load up the employee rows. All right, we're almost done. Next up, what I want to have is a macro. This macro is going to run to load the roles. The macro here is going to load all of this data here. And we kind of have an idea. We kind of know what it's going to be. So let's go ahead and see what entails that before we skip out. It is this one right here. This macro here is going to be the same and load those RACI roles. So we're going to turn off application screen updating. It's already off if we're running this. That's why it's already running a little slow. We're turning it off twice, once above and once below. Probably don't need, but we run this. Sometimes we run this only when we load project tasks. Sometimes we load it when we load the entire project. Okay, so with the RACI database, we're focused on now only this database here. I'm focused on this database here. First thing what I want to do is I only want to know those results from this project. Again, we're going to run the same criteria just as we do with the other databases. Going to run it, and then we're going to get our results. Our results are going to be here, and there's a lot of them. That's why it's a little bit slow here, but there's a lot of them. Then what I want to do is I've got a task ID, I've got employee ID, and I'm going to look for that. So how are we going to get it? I've got a task ID, I've got an employee ID. But what I need to do is I need to know where we're going to place it. What row, what column are we going to place it? If I know I've got a task ID, let's say I've got a task ID of 1, right? And I look all throughout here, use the match or use the found or find, and I look through here and I'm looking for 1. If 1 is found, I know the row it's been found on it. Now I know the row, it's row 9. But now what I do is I need to find the employee. I know, let's take a look back here. I know the employee ID is 1. So now what I need to do is I need to look through all of the employee IDs. Here's our employee IDs. I need to look through all here, anywhere from I-101 to AC. Where is 101 found? Where is number 1 found? Well, it's found directly in column I. So now I have the column, now I have the row, now I know exactly where to place it. So that's just what we're going to do inside here. So the first thing we're going to do is determine the last row of the RACI database. Just like we were going to run an advanced filter based on our project ID number. That's just going to extract it right from here based on I2 through I3, getting all the results for that one project. Once we have that, we're going to get the results from N2 through R2. We're going to make sure that we have a last result row. If it's last, if it's less than 3, we're just going to skip and go to no rows. Assuming that we do have, we're going to run a loop for the results row equals 3 to the last results row. Now, there's some other ways to do it. We could probably run a formula. Let's say we have a match formula. We're going to match this task ID. I would like to try that to see if it's faster. Let's say we had a formula down here. And what we're going to do is we're going to look up this, and I'm going to look it up directly inside, let's say, RACI. Let's say we're going to look up that task ID, run the match, run it on this range here. And then we have another one, so basically using VBA or we're using formulas. Then I have another one looking for the column of that employee. We could do that here too. It might be faster. Here, so we can add some formulas. We bring down the formulas, then we have the row, then we have the column here. And then once we know the row, we can bring it down here. But this time we're going to use VBA. So you got 2 different ways. You got an idea of what, if you want to see what this might look like, let me know in the comments below, and I'm going to put it on our Patreon to see which one's faster, right? So I'll make an update of this file on our Patreon. Okay, so I've got task ID and employee ID are really critical. We need to know that. So that's the information I'm going to extract. So the first thing what I want to do, we're going to run a loop through all the results. I'm going to get that task ID. It's from column N. And I'm going to get that employee ID. It's from column O. So we have that. Now again, I want to look for that task ID, setting the found task. We're looking for it in AH, that column AH. I'm looking for that task. Then I'm also going to look for that employee. That employee is going to come, remember, from 101 to 101, right? That employee ID, I want to look inside 101. Just to reiterate, we're looking for that employee ID 101 all the way from I-101 to AC. We're looking for that task ID all the way from AH9 through all AH and then all the way down to, I guess I could go down to 53. It should be really 53. That's our limit on this particular one. So I'll probably set that to 53. It might make it a little bit quicker. So we had that there. So we're looking for that. Now we need to make sure we can only place, what I want to do is I want to place this I, the R, the L, whatever. I want to place this here, but only if we find a row and only if we find a column. So to do that, we want to make sure both. If not found, task is nothing, right? Remember, this cancels each other out, not nothing. That means if the task is found and if the employee is found, not nothing, then only when both the task ID and employee are found. We're going to set the task row to the found task row. We're going to set the employee column to the found employee column. Now we have a row. Now we have a column. Now we can place it. In RACI, the cells, the task row, the task column, this value based on the found column, based on the found row, is going to equal whatever's in Q in the result row. Q, and the result row is going to come directly from there. That's it. So we're just going to loop through that. And then the active sheet RACI, I want to make sure we select something else just so we can select everything else. I'm just going to select G3. So once it gets loaded, we're selecting G3. That is it. That's all we have to do to load that in. So everything else. And then, of course, we're going to turn on screen updating to true and turn calculation matter. The last macro that we have to go in this training is the project delete. We want to come up with a message box. Are you sure you want to delete this project? Yes or no? If B4, if we don't have a row associated, we go to not saved, right? We just clear it out. Go down here, load the project and list. But if it has been saved, all I want to do is delete the row. And just a reminder again, if you didn't know, once you delete the project, it is going to delete it from this. If I were creating this application for sale, like you should be doing, you also want to clear out, like let's say we're deleting project 1, you also want to run an advanced filter and delete all of the database rows associated with this. Put these in reverse. So the top row, sort them first, it would be 18, the bottom would be 4. Delete row 18, delete row 17, 16. And we do the same thing for project tasks, and we do the same thing for rows. So you also want to delete this data associated with that, not just this. But for this training purposes, it's suffice, but I'm giving you, so that's all. Then all we're going to do is load the project and run the macro new. So that's going to it. So if we want to delete a project, it is relatively simple. All we need to do is just select on a project. It is that same macro that's been tied to this button. We click delete. Are you sure you want to delete it? Yes, and it's going to delete the project. We reload it and it's no longer there. Very, very cool. I'll be making this a little faster, trying to test it out, and certainly making an update for those of you who are on Patreon. If you're not on Patreon, you will want to get on Patreon. I'm going to be adding email automation onto this. You won't want to miss the email automation. That's exclusively for our Patreon, so make sure you get on. Just a few dollars a month, and it also helps support us now. All right, thank you very much for this incredible training. Next week, something brand new. I really appreciate your continued support. Don't forget to subscribe. Click on that icon bell, and plenty of amazing ways to support. We'll see you next week. Thank you so much.